What if the key to the whole case was whispered in a final breath? Menglong's mother, the last words reveal the truth, the appeal that shocked public opinion. Whose names do those words point to? And what happens when grief becomes evidence? Join Red Carpet Revealed as we unpack the clues, the timeline, and the stakes, starting now. Microphones were never meant to carry a voice like this. Tinny, overmatched. They squealed as the couriers of panic do. And then the crowd hushed all at once, an organism that had decided to share a single breath. The steps of the courthouse were warm from the day's heat. Air felt chilled around her. Menglong's mother placed both palms on the wood grain of the lectern, the way one steadies a book too precious to drop. Did not look at the cameras. She looked past them, past the courthouse doors, into a corridor of time the building could not contain. The last words reveal the truth, she said. And in the silence that followed, a headline found its spine. What do last words do to culture tuned for the first take? They compress complexity into a shard everyone wants to hold at once. But the shard cuts unless handled by care, provenance, context. The distinction between recollection and record. Her statement landed like a key tossed from a burning room. The public's reflex was to reach, the law's reflex was to ask where the key had been cut. Reporters who had rehearsed their scripts all morning, a mother's plea, flipped pages and began again. Behind the podium, a family representative, voice steady from practice, framed the line as a request for process rather than a verdict by megaphone. The words would be placed on the record, authenticated if possible, and weighed alongside everything else that pretended to be evidence. The words themselves, what could responsibly be repeated, were brief and stubbornly ambiguous. A compass without a legend. A pair of names? A location? A half-finished sentence that sounded literal to some ears and metaphorical to others. They did not behave like confession, they behaved like a flare seen at distance. Public opinion, addicted to clarity, tried to turn the flare into a map. The courthouse preferred a different sequencing, source, chain of custody, corroboration, admissibility. The mother understood the rhythm. Her appeal, the part after the sentence that trended, was a list of verbs the system owes in moments like this: preserve, protect, proceed. Provenance is the marrow of all such claims. Did the words come from a device, a bedside witness, a message left for safekeeping? Who heard them? Who transcribed them? Who verified that what was heard is what was said? A statement can be both true and unusable. It can also be moving and malleable. The family's counsel explained. Carefulness that sounded like reverence. That they would provide investigators with a rawest form available, audio if it existed, contemporaneous notes if not, timestamps, metadata, chain of custody signatures where possible. The defense, as is their duty, cautioned against elevating end-of-life utterances to the rank of oracle. Memory compresses under strain. Language thins. The law, older than both grief and speculation, has carved out exceptions for dying declarations in some places, closed that door in others. Everywhere asks the same stubborn question: does this statement make a material fact more or less likely? And can we prove it is what we say it is? Around the steps, the city behaved as cities do when confronted with a sentence shaped to carry. Some people cried, some held up their phones like lanterns, some argued about pronouns in the comment sections attached to live streams. A few stood still without speaking at all, as if guarding the room the sentence had made. That room, the psychic one, not illegal, is where narratives form. But narratives, if they are to carry consequences, must make the walk from steps to courtroom without losing shape. There is a danger to last words that the mother herself named exploitation. Her plea was not to crown a truth, it was to disallow the next cycle of rumor from dressing itself in the costume of revelation. She listed her asks without drama: release what can be released without endangering witnesses. Protect those who will have to say hard things under oath. Move filings rather than microphones. Keep the cameras at the curb when the process requires the kind of quiet that public square algorithms cannot honor. Each ask is small. Together they rebuild the rails the case must travel. In the days leading to this appeal, a rough timeline had already been sketched by filings and flurries of stories that could agree on little beyond the dates at the top of their pages. There was the incident whose outlines remain more rumor than judgment. The investigations that seeded the record with exhibits, messages, financial transfers, location pings, each appended with the technical signatures that make defense counsel frown and nod at once. There were leaks, inevitably, which blurred the difference between evidence and strategy and taught the public to confuse viral with verified. Then there was the decision, hers, to speak. Not to tip the scales but to force attention back onto them. We should tell the truth about truth as the law understands it, not a blazing torch, but a mosaic. A mosaic made from pieces that don't look like much until you step back. The mother's words are one tile. Devices seized under warrant. Hashed and logged, are other tiles. A ledger that refuses romance becomes a border. A witness with nothing to gain and sufficient protection to speak safely lends a hue that cannot be faked. The court does not perform magic. It assembles, subtracts, instructs. It resists the seduction of climax because climaxes do not survive appeal. Inside this assembly, his last words reveal the truth is not a plot twist, it is a hypothesis. Hypotheses demand tests. The first is provenance, independent analysts who can confirm whether an audio file, a possibility the family's counsel carefully did not promise, came from the device it is said to have come from. When it is said to have been recorded, without splice or semantic surgery. Second is consistency, do the words align with times, with movements, with money? The third is necessity, do they add something the case cannot otherwise prove? Or do they only make us feel what we already felt? Feeling has its work, jurisprudence has other labor. Why, then, did the appeal shock public opinion? Because it put grief into a grammar everyone recognizes and no one can own. It was a mother's voice. Brave because it refused dramatics. Powerful because it suggested that evidence may come wrapped in breath rather than watermark. It asked citizens to become better readers of process. Louder advocates for a position. That request alone is a rebuke to our habits. The shock was as much self-recognition as revelation. We are not good, anymore, at waiting for paper. Family's representative had prepared for the tidal pull of attention. They posted. Minutes after the microphones were quieted. Page explaining boundaries, the address would remain undisclosed, minors would remain invisible. Operational details of any protective measures would not be discussed. And no third-party fundraiser would be endorsed unless verified by counsel in writing. In a smaller typeface sad a more radical sentence, we will not name names that the record has not yet named. Even if doing so would make us feel momentarily powerful. The Internet, which loves power in all its false flavors. And then, faced with that sentence, had to choose between decency and the easy high of speculation. So part 1 ends where careful stories should, not with decisive triumph or despair, but with an alignment of tasks. Words have been spoken, or quoted, or remembered. Now be tested. The public, if it wants to be useful rather than loud, will learn how to read docket numbers, how to share filings rather than fragments, to refuse the dopamine rush of the unsourced claim. The court will keep time with the slow metronome of rules that make the next part possible. It is not cinematic. It's how facts become sentences that can be carried by daylight. Morning reassembled the scene with different light. Steps were granite again, not a stage. Whose face had become a thumbnail for 1,000 hot takes, walked in through a side entrance because famous sorrow is still sorrow and deserves a measure of mercy. Inside, the ritual of a system older than any scandal resumed, calendars called. Clerks arranged files into small dignities. A judge took the bench and invited counsel to begin the day's necessary boredom. Admissibility is the first hill any last words must climb. Dictions disagree about dying declarations, hearsay exceptions make room for the obvious reality that some truths expire if the law demands the speaker outlive them. But exceptions are narrow by design. The proponent must authenticate, this is what it claims to be. Must establish relevance, this helps answer a question the law cares about. And must survive the Rule 403 balance, its probative value outweighs the risk of unfair prejudice. Defense counsel, trained to guard the moat around these gateways. Argue ambiguity. The possibility of suggestion by questioners. The danger of turning a grief-saturated phrase into prosecutorial cudgel. The bench must be neither sentimental nor cynical. The bench must be exact. Exactness looks like this: spectrograms of audio files to detect edits where human hearing might miss a splice. Encoder signatures that match a device to its own sonic fingerprint. Metadata that places bits in time. Independent transcripts prepared. Blind by more than one listener. A chain of custody log with no polite lacunae. Exactness also looks like humility, An acknowledgement that memory at the end of life is not a lie when it misremembers. Semicolon, that mishearing is not malice, that translation across dialect and fear can make a simple pronoun do too much? And it in one language is a he or they in another. Have swallowed worse abuses of grammar. They must not pretend language is ever a perfect mirror. Even if the statement clears the gate, it does not carry the day alone. It goes to the jury, or the judge. In a bench trial, covered in instructions about how much weight to give it. The case must be proved, or rejected, by what surrounds the words, the stubborn facticity of movement logs. Here's in personal arithmetic. The matching of camera angles to time cards and door swipes. Prosecutors who hang a case on a single sentence invite reversal. Defense attorneys who ignore a corroborated sentence invite disbelief. The good ones on both sides know the difference between centerpiece and accent. Outside the courtroom, the appeals aftershocks demanded editorial choices. Forms began labeling clips with context cards pointing to primary documents. Some newsrooms adopted a small but meaningful practice. Each time they mentioned the mother's quote, they appended the line. Cases remain unproven unless adjudicated. Courts weigh evidence from all sides. It is not the kind of sentence that fattens an algorithm. It is the kind of sentence that keeps a city from eating its own. 50, meanwhile, pulled its chair back to the table. Family had received targeted harassment in waves. Peace had responded with presence. Now the work turned to persistence, a protection plan that assumes the internet will outlast outrage. That plan looks like infrastructure, doors, cameras, neighborhood agreements, and like paperwork, protective orders, platform escalations, preservation letters with ticket numbers that make companies take the call. It looks like a community that refuses to let doxing dress as civic duty. Like moderators who delete with discipline. Friends who accompany without fanfare. Money trailed the story the way gravity trails mass. If coordination exists behind the pressure, it will reveal itself not through a monologue but through invoices. Shell entities leave sloppy footprints. Consultancies evaporate when asked to define services. No coordination exists. If the storm is ambient malice rather than organized weather, then the story is smaller but not softer. Institutions must still be built to withstand the cheap ferocity of burner accounts and third-party proxies. Both problems are old, the tools to answer them are newer than our habits. Comparative cases offered cautionary rhymes. In one jurisdiction, a mother's public recounting of last words was so overboosted by commentators that voir dire became a quagmire. Trial courts salvaged legitimacy by sequestering and instructing so thoroughly that critics accused it of cruelty. It held on appeal because the record wore its discipline like armor. In another, a powerful but ambiguous statement was admitted without adequate foundation. An appellate court sent the case back with a stern lesson on the difference between pathos and proof. The lesson for this moment is neither cynicism nor credulity. It is craft. Policy took its turn at the microphone. This time in committee rooms rather than on courthouse steps. Evidence release protocols can be tightened without smothering transparency. Context bundles. Redaction templates. Lines that prevent drip, then spin. Platform threat response laws, service-level agreements, can be rooted in specific triggers, number of reports from verified accounts, proximity to court events. Of doxing elements. Anti-doxing measures can be written with exceptions narrow enough to protect reporting and wide enough to stop harassment from dressing as investigation. Victim notification rules can be modernized so that families do not learn about filings from the phones of strangers. Civil liberties advocates. It's the only people as stubborn as trial judges. Insist on guardrails that keep reforms from becoming censorship. Good. The goal is not to silence, it is to aim. Question that opened the day, what if the key to the case was whispered in a final breath, is no longer the kind of portal we need. We have better doors. The key is now one of many. A piece that may turn a lock only when aligned with others designed for the same mechanism, corroboration, admissibility, durability against appeal. Others' appeal shocked public opinion because it reminded us of. We keep choosing to forget, grief is not a cudgel, it is a compass. It points. It does not decide. So what does justice look like here? Register that resists slogans? In one possible future, the statement is admitted, corroborated, woven, not crowned, into record that persuades a finder of fact beyond the necessary threshold. Consequences follow. Measured and enforceable. Remedies are not speeches, they are orders that make future harm expensive, restitution, injunctive relief. Senators who are more accountant than hero. In another future. The statement is partially corroborated. Used to narrow focus. But cannot carry the heaviest counts, civil remedies, structural reforms, and institutional accountability to a quieter but longer work. In a third future. The statement is excluded, the case proceeds without it, the culture, chastened, remembers that not every powerful line belongs in a courtroom, and reforms the way we handle such lines so that families are not asked to weaponize mourning to be heard. When the day's business ended, went home to the devices that would offer them another 1,000 opinions before sleep. The courthouse was briefly itself again, a place for paper, wood, light. A clerk turned a page, not metaphorically, because filing requires it. A bailiff checked the latch on a door that has no poetry in its hinges. In a quiet office, the judge underlined 2 phrases in a draft order, probative value and unfair prejudice, and tried to ensure that the words would mean as much tomorrow as they did last century, and more than they will next week when the next scandal tries to use them as decor. The mother's line will remain in the world because the world learned to survive on lines. But in the room where consequences are made, must join other lines to become something sturdier than sympathy. The appeal that shocked us will be remembered not for having won an argument but for having disciplined one. If there is grace to salvage from this, be modest, that we remembered how to wait for documents. That we learned to share filings without turning them into theater. We built a practice of care strong enough to carry both due process and the people whose lives are braided into it. You can, if you need a sentence to hold on to, keep the mother's. Beautiful and brave. But pair it with another, less quotable one. Last words can point, only the full record can prove. Between those 2 sentences lies the only kind of truth a society can live with, the kind that outlasts us. Words reveal the truth moved hearts, but the record must move the law. If this appeal mattered, because it redirected the crowd toward documents, timelines, rulings that can stand in daylight. Let the statement point, let corroboration prove. From here, justices follow through, authenticate, admit, enforce, and protect the people carrying the cost. For reading with patience and care. Your attention, measured in rigor. 6. Makes space for survivor-centered reporting, fair defense, and a process that can do its precise, unglamorous work. Stay with us for verified updates as filings, hearings, and reforms unfold.